So my plan is to move through this, spend about 30 minutes covering the material, uh, and then open it up to questions. I'm a big believer in less is more, and why pack 1 hour's worth of material into 4 hours, which has been a lot of my experience within federal training. So I'm going to go lighter and encourage people to have questions. I'm going to talk about the concepts of arriving on scene and how to work with friends and family or co-workers. Look at the alternative ALS acronym. Introduce you to another acronym, SIMPLE, which is an idea of how things to think about and is accompanied by a little bit of a handout that I'll figure out how to get to your coordinator so you can have a couple of copies of this. And also talk about death notifications, which I've done a little bit too much of this week. Just want to be really clear about the dangers of triggering or any memories that come up with any of this material. This is actually my telephone number. And so if somebody really has something that affects them during this, I want to encourage you to look to your coworkers, your space, or if you've got nobody else to talk to me, and just make sure you're looking after yourself. We've all faced stress in one form or another, especially if you're working with the federal government. You don't need to be alone when you're suffering. And the best way we have of supporting each other is to reestablish community. So I just throw that up there as a reminder. And what we're going to be talking about is this concept of the reluctant family liaison officer. This was coined actually by a ranger out in Yellowstone who, when I was teaching the family liaison officer, which is a 24 to 4, it's a 8 to 16 hour course that I teach, was looking for something a little bit more bite-sized for people who might come across an incident on the trail and figure out how to best support those people in that space that are not the direct impact zone. So the idea of throwing a rock into a big pool of water and it's splashing up, that's the incident. That's the cardiac, that's the broken leg. But as it ripples out from there, there are these concentric circles that move out, whether it's coworkers, families, or friends, who need to have some degree of management. And what we're talking about in this is how do you manage those people who are out of the splash zone? They might have got a little bit of water on them and they're watching what's happening, or they're having to give some background to talk about a medical history. What are some simple ways that we can manage those people without necessarily doing any harm? So I want you to think about right now, and as we go through this, is think about an incident that you had where you were in that position of managing people associated with incident. Start to get in your brain what you did. So did you get them water and something to eat? Did you shelter them and give them warmth? Did you start to report out to them? And then also within this, and this is what's going to generate the questions, is think about what you might do differently in light of having a discussion about this. So this is really a reflection exercise for you to do individually because they didn't have the opportunity to set up some work groups here. And remember, this is an emotionally charged environment with these ripples heading out. I think if you manage a scene well, and we've all got experiences, we save resources, we reduce distractions, and we deliver humanity. I think often in these incidents, the place where damage happens is you have the medical emergency or this crisis with an individual, but there's also this traumatic exposure that people watching have, particularly family members. And if we can do a hands-on, kind, compassionate, objective management of those people, we reduce some of that long-term damage. So I want to sort of kick off with this idea of a classic accident in the backcountry. For us in Yosemite, you'll have a fatal fall out in the backcountry, maybe on Cathedral Peak, and the partner you have to walk out with that person who's witnessed the fall, witnessed the medical response that didn't go well, and then they've helicoptered out, and you're walking that person along the trail. And we're thinking about in that 2-hour walkout, how do we best give them the chance to be in a healthy position? And I want to introduce this idea of an alternative ALS, advanced life support. This is a little bit different. The very first thing we're looking at is an assessment with A, is figuring out, are they in a position to actually process what you're telling them. Are they cold, scared, hungry? Can they hear you? Do you share a language? Are you talking in a bunch of acronyms and just confusing them? And figuring out whether they can participate. Often in an accident, if you can find a small, meaningful role for someone in a response that is not a distraction, it's a deflection, you're actually giving them purpose in a place in which they feel powerless. Let's take them from powerless to purpose. So one of the things I think about a lot in the assessment is, can they sit down and write down the details about the person who's been involved that we can give to medical? Or if this is in a position to really start to spell out with somebody sitting next to them the things that have happened in that instance. So you're starting to generate a report if it's something like a fall. And the key piece is, do you want to keep them as close as you can in that to the incident, or can you move them to a safe zone and still keep control? So the assessment is linked into, where are they at? Are they able to hear? Are they able to participate? Oh, sorry, you might have heard something there. That was a soundscape thing that I didn't realize was on there. So A is assessment, L is location. So figuring out a way that you can shape where they're sitting and what's going on, so they're not necessarily exposed to seeing the CPR in action. So moving people from the upside of the trail to the downside of the trail, so their view shed becomes past the incident, or putting them in a soundscape where they aren't hearing a bunch of radios going off and hearing all of that chatter. Even moving them to a position where the waves and the wind aren't affecting your communication. So location is a key piece, and it's almost falling into that 90% of communication is nonverbal. It's putting them in a safer place with a reduced and less stimulating view shed to effectively work with them. And the third thing is support. Who else have you got to support you out there? So a climbing accident, you're a trail worker out on the trail. You've got a ranger who's coming to support you. They're doing the medical. You're looking around. You're like, I haven't got that much training. Who can you use in that group that's affected, or in other people who are next to it, or they're adjacent to the incident, to help support you in that moment? So I encourage people to say, who's got wilderness first responder training? Because there's a degree of mental health and psychological first aid in that training now that you can access from a well-meaning passerby. And that's not necessarily turning the entire control over them, but it's accessing who you think might be able to help you. Again, going from that point of powerless to actually participation and empowerment is a key in all of this to be healthy. So that's ALS. So a key piece in all of this, and I think it's one of the reasons why people struggle so much in moving into this idea of managing people in crisis, is struggling with the idea of this balance of liaison and advocate. And what I'm actually advocating for is a liaison. It's somebody who's a compassionate, objective person, who's a kind communicator. You're not advocating a position. You're actually being the place where communication's coming backwards and forwards. You're giving them facts. You're asking them questions. You're figuring out how to accommodate their needs. And where it goes a bit sideways is that point at which you go from being a liaison into an advocate. And the one thing you aren't at this point is necessarily pleading somebody's case like an advocate would. The idea that you would be thrust into the position that could be oppositional or in conflict with an ICS, instant command system response, is a really key piece of thinking about, how do I do this in a healthy manner. And so the liaison, which is simply focused on communication and having that kind atmosphere in which stuff can go backwards and forwards, is essentially what the family liaison officer does. Within the ICS, a family liaison officer is pretty high in the command staff. And I don't know whether you can see, I've got a diagram up that you might be able to see, and then I've got a beautifully engineered PVC bit product, which shows you all the different chiefs down here, and the family liaison officer is situated pretty high up. and they're in the flow of information, and they're the only position that has an on and off valve in truth, because there's a time that family liaison officer stops being the incident commander's representative and actually gets turned off. The flow of information moves, and the incident basically gets decommissioned at that point. But I demonstrate this because what you're doing by working with the family or friends group is you're allowing the medical to all happen, the response to happen with a degree of insulation. What you're doing is you're removing that emotional piece, that bit that can be quite distracting, legitimate but distracting, and you're providing a place where that can be managed off to the side, so all the responders can really focus in on the really important thing, which is those chest compressions. Are there any questions about that idea, the ICS and liaison and advocate?
I have a question. How does one get set up? Who initiates, traditionally, who initiates, we need one of these? We don't have one, we need one of these.
So that's a great question. I think pretty much every incident, you need somebody who's talking to the associated and affected people. Is that if you put yourself in the mindset of seeing anything on media where it says there's somebody standing in front of a camera and a family member goes, "We don't know what's going on," that's a product of a breakdown in communication. And so I would say that at some point everybody needs somebody to focus in on the patient and somebody to focus in on the affected people. And that can be a very easy role, because it could be like, hey, give us a little bit of room, put them in the ambulance. This is where we're going. And that's kind of that contact. Or it can be more involved, which is a lot of what I deal with, is the idea if you manage someone's emotional reaction early, you have the best chance to record it, of not controlling, but managing the emotional fire that goes with that. The scale of it comes down. So I will always say to someone on an incident, get your medical people on this, and then have somebody off to the side starting to work with those who've witnessed the trauma. So what I'm going to ask you to do is I'm going to ask you to write down digitally in your mind, in stone, even if you choose to do it, this word simple, and put it in this vertical setup. Because this is this little acronym that I throw out there as a way of thinking about how you're going to manage a scene. So this is the outer circle. It's not the splash zone where the incident is, and walking up to people and saying, "Hey, I'm here to help." So the very first thing we talk about is stabilization. The idea that you're going to get some training wheels out there and you're going to start to figure out a way to take that elevated cortisol high flight or fight response because they've seen a trauma, and you're going to start to bring it down and actually take them out of that hyper aroused state. They are jacked up. They've watched somebody fall 80 feet, bounce a bunch, hit the deck, clear issues around trauma and blood. They're hyped. And so we have to bring them down from that. So if you think about this as a fall, it's a classic little route in Yosemite. A witness fall with the climbing party at the bottom. They've witnessed their leader fall on a fatal fall, and all the associated trauma that goes with that. And so what you're going to do is that idea of you're going to start to bridge a connection when we walk up to people, because if we do this well and we do it in a timely fashion, it leads to trust and the ability to follow instructions. So I throw out that idea of how do you make connection on the scene, and it can start with as simple as saying to somebody, "You are safe." Walking up to somebody who's witnessed this, they're wide-eyed, their vitals are elevated, they're breathing kind of off the hook, they are amped, they can't string sentences together, and you look at them, you make some degree of eye contact, and you say, "You're safe right now. I'm here to help." And lowering your tone and reiterating you are safe. Because what research is saying is that simple phrase, or along those lines, is part of the switch that takes people out of the hyper aroused state, which is associated with stress, and brings them down to the more functional level. And a lot of that is based on de-escalation principles. And I've got this sort of classic LA scene on the beach, the cops are for once making a good connection with someone. They're giving them space physically, so not stepping right into them. I'm English, so being a little bit distant from people is pretty easy. So I have that as far as a cultural benefit on my end. The idea that within de-escalation, it starts with listening. You say, tell me what's going on. Where are you at? Empathizing, that point, repeating stuff back. The idea that you're saying you're recognizing where people are at. You've witnessed a terrible thing. Yeah, it's a terrible thing you've witnessed. Uh, and then tone is coming down in your own elevated arousing because you're excited, is bringing it down and being measured in what you're saying. One of the ways I encourage people to think about de-escalation is think about you having a script in your hand and taking the time to take a deep breath and read the words that you're going to say. So you aren't just riffing at them. You're actually being really deliberate in your communication styles. So reminders here in this one where you're stabilizing is to think about phrases like "you are safe." Can we move over here to allow the medics to do their job? You're offering a binary option in communication. Often in stressful situations, people are overwhelmed by instruction. And if you give them 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 ideas of what they could be doing, they can't make a decision. It's binary. It's yes or no, this or that. So the second one here on that's simple is inform. So you can put that inform either digitally, physically write it down and chip it into stone. And this is the classic bit where we're trying to get to a point where we don't know what is happening. And this is, I really am a believer that a part of de-escalation is providing real-time information, restating what has happened and what the plan is. And critically here is saying, I don't know. When somebody says, what happens now? And being able to say to someone, we're still forming that plan out. I don't know exactly what the timing of it is. And that's a really good question that I'm going to come back to. So you're actually showing that you're listening. You're starting to produce a little bit of a foundational map about, oh, I'm going to come back and give some information. And you aren't overcommitting and lying, which is going to erode the trust. And informing starts with who you are. What can you tell me about? Who can you tell me how you tell someone who you are? And that comes from practice. For me, it's like it's walking in on scene. Hi, I'm Mutlow with Yosemite Search and Rescue. I'm really sorry to be meeting you under these circumstances. I'm here to help. I want to assure you you're safe right now. I have connections within the incident command to help start to figure out what's going on, but they're going to start with asking, what do you need? Have you any questions for me? And I got complicated there and I went back on my own thing because I said, what do you need? And have you got any questions for me? One of those, I probably would have just gone with one and given a pause to have that happen and then follow up with a second question. People consistently need to be reminded about what has happened in my experience is that it's not too much to say, let's just take a minute and refresh where we're at right now. We got on scene at 20 minutes ago, 12:20. We responded up here. Kenny's had that fall, and we've talked to you about Kenny being dead. I'm not going to beat around the bush. And we're still framing up how we're going to remove Kenny at this point and get him out of there. And right now, my attention is focused on you and what you need and getting you to a comfortable position. And it might be a reminder of times. It might be a reminder of who's involved. It might be a reminder of your name. And so I do a lot of writing down of notes, even if it's just handwritten. Here's my name. Here's the timeline of what we're doing. And I might hold that or share it with them. But the key point there is that becomes my script to remind them what we've already done, to start to form that foundation of information that they can start trusting as they reorganize and integrate what has happened. They always want to know what the plan is moving forward. And so that's an easy one to get out of whack. So I don't tell anybody what's happening until I've heard it from the IC or the person on the ground. This ambulance is going to this hospital, and I get an assurance from the driver. Or the helicopter, I've heard from the IC, this is definitely where they're going to fly to. If it starts to ramp up in different jurisdictions, there's different levels of response. If an investigator is going to get involved, that's something that I would like to be able to share with people on scene because that starts to prep them for questions they might be getting at the trailhead. So just really quick, we just go over that really clearly. What my name is, information to share. That's, you can see that is a binary choice. Do you want to ask questions, or should I report out to you? Giving control and letting that foundation come in, and always restate what has happened and establish a timeline. M on that simple is now manage. In this group of 3 or 4 people, you might have a smorgasbord of interaction. I responded to an incident in which the person who was essentially belaying at the scene of the fatal flaw was the most high functioning person, and the fiance was the lowest functioning person. And so, who is the primary contact is not rated on what they did or how they are involved. It's what they can deal with. And so, in a group of 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, I try to find one person as my main person to talk to, and then empower them to help you to disseminate the information. So instead of managing a group, you're managing an individual, you're empowering them to slide back in. And that's where a written timeline or written notes will help keep them on the agreed narrative. And within that, in managing, it's where do people need to be? So a car wreck, let's all stand back here out of traffic at the back of this rig and have a discussion back here. This is our meeting place now that's out of the immediate response zone. Then it's a little bit insulated and maybe out in the soundscape where there's less sounds, sirens and cars rushing by. Or out in the trail, it's in a place that's set back from running water. It's in a place where you're not picking up a lot of wind, or you're out of the view of necessarily, or the view shed of other backcountry users. Useful phrases here in the managing phrase, I think about, will you help me help you? Are you in a position to do that? Because we're stretched right now. We've got limited resources, and I can be here right now helping you, or we can pull somebody off the scene on the kayak to help manage, but we don't want to do that. We want to keep this really clean. This is a good phrase. Narrowing who I talk to will make this more efficient. Allow me to get back to support your family member. The idea that you might be pulled backwards and forwards from the immediate, the splash zone, to this other zone is really being clear and pragmatic at this moment and giving them a choice. In all of this, the idea that we give room to start processing whatever you're sharing is essential. I'm going to be quiet for a minute to create the space for you to think about what I've just shared. It's really easy in crisis to fill with tons and tons of words and actions. And in order for people to start figuring out what actually has happened, they need the room to do that. And so one of the ways we can do that is taking a step back as far as filling that auditory landscape and having silence, but telling them why you're being silent. I'm going to take a minute just to step back and be quiet so you can think about what I've shared. Because you're teeing up for that next point from SIMP to listening. And this is a key piece that I found over the years is there are so many questions, and it's a great place to start writing requests down and have them verbalize what they're thinking. And I validate every question. I'll say, hey, great questions, just keep them coming. All right, I'm not committing to any answers. I'm telling them I'm going to see what I can do and find out what's down here. Some of these will not be answered because we're not in a position to do that. But by going from that pause to listening to them bring stuff back, you're actually setting up for the next piece, which is what is if you're actively listening. I don't know why this isn't going. There we go. These are the type of questions that I think about sharing with people. Any written note, I'll sit with somebody side by side because I'm controlling the space and I'm not adversarial, confrontational in front of them. I'm sitting next to them so they can see what I'm writing. Let me read these back to you. Does that sound like what you asked me? And they might ask it to be tinkered a little bit, or that isn't what happened. All of that is building trust, which is a key to clear communication. Because ultimately you're going to exit from the scene, either permanently or just for a moment to get information. So often people say, are looking at Why are you leaving? I'm going to go and leave for 10 minutes to get an update on the incident from the incident commander, and then I'm going to come back. If you're going to come back, we want to know when you're coming. I'm coming back to talk to you. And then you're going to identify when that's going to happen and where it's going to happen. And this is another way to control the group so they don't drift back into the scene of the CPR or the packaging or the heli zone. It's just saying, I'm going to encourage you to stay in this site right here because I'm going to come back here in 10 minutes. Because you're reframing a way to control them at that point and where they feel, okay, this is our spot right now, and I'm coming back to you, I'm coming back to serve you. There's some nuance there that can help. I'm going to ask you to stay right here by my car. I'll be back in 10 minutes. Now it's 9:20. So they know at 9:30 you're going to be back. And then there's this idea of transferring. It might be that you're in a position where it's a fleeting connection with a group, and you're going to figure out who the next person to talk to is. And it might be the EMT or the paramedic on the ambulance. Hey, this is so-and-so's partner. I just want to make sure they got a connection so they know where you're going next. This is the last time you're going to interact with me. I'm really sorry, Judy, for what's happened. But now your point person is Kenny with the ambulance. Transferring is a really key piece because it's really easy if this is not done well, people feel abandoned in their moment of need. So put effort into figuring out how you're going to transfer. And the sharing of contact information at these points is critical. Is you're in an intense situation because you suddenly get accelerated into a dynamic because you've watched this trauma play out and people are really potentially relying on you. It's okay to collect other people's information. And if you've done a good transfer, that's the person they need to be talking to, the investigator, the ranger, the ambulance, the hospital. I hesitate to give my information out. So it always goes to my supervisor as opposed to me individually, because the sheer volume of calls that you might have might get you confused on that contact, or it might drift into something that is harder to manage. One of the ways that I actually work on transfers out is to use this phrase. I've been reassigned. I want to make sure you have the contact information for the person you'll be talking to, which is a neat administrative way to step out of the role. You're no longer connected with it. So we just talked through really quickly the simple. One of the pieces I want to touch on is a clarity in working a lot of these incidents over the years is to look at the lack of the things we might not be. I'm not a grief counselor. I'm not a therapist. And we're exposed to a lot of highly traumatic events out in the backcountry. And it's easy at that point to lose your humanity, insulate yourself, and step back and say, hey, I'm going to give them some room here. And actually, what I encourage people to do is not necessarily to step up and go, hey, I'm here. Look at me, look at me. But I do think it's a place where we're there as a witness. So in the event of a death, I make sure I'm present if the family or the friends want me to be there. I don't need to be saying anything. I'm there to bear witness and to legitimize some things that they might say. Somebody says, I don't know what to do. And you say, yeah, this is a shitty thing. This is an awful thing. It's okay to feel like you don't know what to do. And it's legitimizing what they're saying. I don't tolerate transphobia or homophobia in that moment. I don't tolerate racism in that moment. I excuse myself from it. But I do put up with a lot as people do anger and they get confused and they have denial and bargaining. And you might have heard of some of those pieces because that's that classic model of grieving, Kubler-Ross. And it's really important to remember in that grieving model that her work was based on people facing death, not people who've been confronted with death. So traumatic death in the backcountry, the work she did was wandering around essentially within hospice and looking at people facing immediate death. I really like the Murray Parks model, and I really encourage people to look at this to understand where people are coming from and actually meet them at their point, not to be a therapist or counselor, but to understand what's going on. So a lot of times when we're out on the trail, we're looking at shock and numbness, really the prevalent sort of stage of what's going on. And that drift into yearning and searching, a protracted search 5 days, which has become increasingly less optimistic on finding somebody, or particularly around a disappeared person in water, the yearning and searching phrase kicks in. And these latter stages of disorganization and despair, reorganization and recovery, we rarely get exposed to. I actually like this model for what's happened with the feds because this is kind of what you've gone through as a workforce. And it's a really good model because it says it's fluid and it isn't a set of steps that go down and you reach this point. There's a lot of going backwards and forwards. There's lots of ups and downs. And it gives you the room to be human. It isn't a machine and a mechanic that says this is the way it's going to be. And in this raw event where somebody has had loss or they have an unknown, we give them the room to seesaw backwards and forwards, and we just meet them with compassion and empathy. We talked a little bit about death notifications, and I'm not going to go way down and deep into this. There's a lot that we can do to make it easier for people, but it doesn't mean to say it's going to be, it's easier for us a lot of the times. And what we want to do is get them to take away really specific pieces in it. So any death notification should be clear. I'm so sorry to inform you right now, Kenny has died in the accident. I'm so sorry for your loss. It leaves no debate about what happened to Kenny, and you're feeling compassionate towards them. It's concise. At the initial moment in which we inform someone, we don't need to talk about all the work we did with an airway, or we ran CPR for 20 minutes and then medical control said we don't need to keep going. Very early on, it's clear and concise. It is, I'd like to say 2 sentences, and then critically, there's silence. And again, there's this piece that we want to fill that void. But again, having heard this, there's this noise that I've heard a number of mothers made, and somebody told me last year that it's a noise called keening, and it's a loss of acute loss. It's the noise of an acute loss, or a mother. With mothers, I've heard it a number of times, losing their children, and it's this guttural, out of this world noise that makes the hair on the back of my neck go up even now as I think about it. And we have to make room for this physical, uncharted emotion to come out and not be filled with administrative clutter. There will be time later for you to catch up on those details if they want them. But right now, we just need to carry this very heavy news. We can't sugarcoat it because it's awful, and make it in a digestible manner that is not complex. And I just throw this out as the most amazing. If you read nothing else out of this, this is a notification tool that's used in the ER. It's a very long acronym. I'm not going to go into it in details, but I really encourage you to read up on this if you're working in the backcountry, because anybody, or in the front country, anybody faced with being on the edge of notifications they don't do themselves, this is a really good tool to recognize what a good progression might look like as someone's planning. And more importantly, hey, this is the stages that people go through in processing. This is a much more in-depth tool than I've offered you. So there are these little cards I've got that I've made up that are a product, and I've been sending them out to people for postage and sort of a recovering of the cost. They're 45 cents each, and they actually cover this whole piece. You can see death notification, the ALS here, and then on the inside, it talks about really on the right, it's got phrases that are helpful, things to think about as far as managing people, and then it reminds you on stabilization, inform, and manage. And I'm going to bring up at the end this 4 phases of grief, which is Browlby did the work too, but it's known as the Murray Parks, as just the most amazing thing to look at. And I want you, as people who are involved in around the federal service and working in the outdoors and going through a hard time with the environment is just to reiterate, it's been hard. And I recognize that. And you may be acutely aware that you're grieving or struggling with stuff. This is a really interesting read. It's not necessarily going to heal anything, but it helps to explain in the best way that I've seen this human condition about where we're at and trying to come to terms with what the future might present. And I want to draw attention to reorganization and recovery. It's a long road. It's not something that happens immediately for us. And while this is focused on helping the friends and family or coworkers outside of a accident, recognize where we're at right now as well and figure out how we can be healthy within that. And there's really good resources out there. Responder Alliance is a really good place to look around psychological first aid. I do some instructing with them, so just want to be really clear about that. But there are a number of groups that are out there that help us understand how to make what we call green choices. So whether it's something like this on the stress continuum and an encouragement on how to do empowerment or working within your community, or simply having healthy inter-community connections that aren't maybe based on drinking too much and being a bit rowdy, that actually have at its heart music, reading, sharing a movie, just sitting in silence with people. There are healthy ways we can be. And I just throw this up at the end. If people are interested in more family liaison stuff, Facebook still exists. I don't really like it that much, but I have a Facebook page with free resources. I am on Insta talking about psychological first aid, family liaison, and swiftwater rescue. I have a couple of books out. If anybody is interested in getting more information on the full family liaison officer course, then there's a thing, the QR code there that puts you on the website and talks about the courses I run. And then if you want, there's an HBO movie that has probably the best representation of a family liaison officer working with a family. It's about a murder in Sweden. It's not grisly. They never show the murderer. They talk a lot about the interaction of law enforcement with the family. And it's a beautiful model of how to be compassionate, empathetic, and not overpromise.
Wow, that was amazing, Moose.
Hey,
And
thanks a lot. That was good. It was a good reminder of everything that can happen out there, and most of us have dealt with situations like that. It was a really good refresher, and I learned some new stuff there because I've had to deal with some of those situations as well. So I appreciate that.
Oh, I'm happy to help. And good luck this season.